Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar for the Next Patient Week. Today's topic is the roadmap to a modern workplace for medical affairs, challenges and opportunities. And we are joined by 4 thought leaders who will shortly introduce themselves and share a little bit about their own experience. Vlad Hogenhuis, who's the Director of Board of Directors, Emma Booth, Director and Head of EU Medical Capabilities, Chris Wade, Associate VP of Strategic Solutions from Omnipresence, and Mark Johnson, Director of Digital Engagements from GSK. So we'll have each of them introduce themselves with a bit more thoroughness than that, and we'll go from there. So can I please ask Vlad, if you wouldn't mind just starting us off by introducing yourself and answering our first question, which is, what is the roadmap to modernize medical affairs?
Sure. Thank you, Gabriella, and also thank you to the organizers of the symposium for inviting me. Again, my name is Vlad Hogenhuis, formerly Chief Operating Officer of Ultragenics, responsible for commercial manufacturing and BD, but also have been at GSK and Merck for a variety of roles, in particular overseeing the uptake of new technologies. And, as to the question of medical affairs playing a central role, I believe that this is really the dawn of medical affairs playing a key role in the uptake of new technologies. All of these technologies really pertain on the development of trust between the manufacturer, the opinion leaders, the patient, and this is the key moment for these complicated technologies to be well understood, data generated from the patient to the physician. And when we do that with the availability of new technologies that are available to us for generating data, identifying patients, communicating the care around the patient, this is important for all of the medical departments, medical affairs, to be prepared to take on that responsibility. And I'll be sharing together with my colleagues key examples in that regard of how that can be done and how this will ultimately all benefit the patient, everything that I know all of the panelists are very passionate about and strive to do together with their organization. So Gabriella, I look forward to that discussion. Thank you.
Likewise, Vlad, thank you so much. Emma, can we turn to you for an introduction and answer to the question, what's the roadmap to modernize medical affairs?
Certainly, and thank you also very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to discuss this important topic. So I am Emma Booth. I am the head of medical capabilities in Europe for Amgen. I think this is, really an important topic and an important opportunity. This year has afforded us a great deal of acceleration, and I think it's up to us to take advantage of that and to embrace the challenges that come with it. For me, one of the critical points is really understanding what is important to people and ensuring that we're not delivering redundancy. So really being sensitive, everybody's time is hugely precious as we juggle a million things from the same place. We work and live in the same place at the moment, and really helping to ensure that we're delivering the content, the information that's required and when it's required and in the way that people want to receive it. So embracing, other industries and the approaches like with Netflix and providing more on demand rather than always, being the person to kind of deliver the message. So I think considering more considerately the person that we're trying to provide information to.
That's great. Thank you so much, Emma. Great to have you with us. Mark Johnson, can we turn to you?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you. So Mark Johnson, I work for GSK, and I'm involved in the space of sort of digital engagement. Quite a broad term, but really I suppose I've always played in that space of bringing digital and the whole sort of psychology and behaviour into medical affairs. And I just love, I think it's a great area to work in, being the sort of voice of the patient and talking about relationships. And Vlad mentioned trust and all of those sort of things. And so if we talk about the question of the modern workplace, I think, hey, what do we mean by modern? And I suppose part of that is, for me, bringing digital into that. And I agree with Emma, the COVID and the pandemic has accelerated all of that. It's just given us a huge platform around digital that potentially our customer facing medical leads are now having to do a lot of things remotely. A lot of us as patients with our healthcare professionals are doing those remotely as well. So a lot of changes to maybe what is the modern workplace very quickly. And I suppose when we talk about a roadmap, for me, I sort of visualize a sort of map of Google directions, I suppose. Other directions are available, of course, but I think for me, it's very important that we know where we're starting and where we're going to, and then what our purpose is. And if we have that, then you can start to look at the roadmap and that journey. What are we trying to do? Is it about, and I think for me, medical affairs very much around improving the science, and it's around the discussion and having that sort of trust level. So then that becomes very clear that we want to be able to improve our communications. We want to make the trust absolutely explicit and use all the digital channels and traditional channels as best we can.
Thank you so much and welcome. Chris, can we ask you the same question, just an introduction for yourself, and what do you think is the roadmap to modernize medical affairs?
Sure, thanks, Gabrielle, and thanks very much for inviting me. So I'm Chris Wade. I'm the Strategic Solutions Lead at Omnipresence. So we are the technology applications arm of the Indegene Group. And I think it's, firstly great to be here today, but I think also too, the question of the role that medical affairs can play, particularly when we think about the question of patients, given this is Patient Week. We know it's historically always played a very central role, but when we look at the question of how technology can be applied to both help the internal side, so we think about within the medical affairs organization itself, but then alongside that, what is happening externally? So how is technology able to help the patient experience, and alongside that, the healthcare professional experience, given the two are intrinsically linked. So we see I think this a great topic when we sort of touch on this idea of the modern workplace, because that's not just about what is happening within our organizations, it's about the organizations that we're working with. When we think about that care environment that healthcare professionals and patients have to operate in, they are dependent on collaboration. So we see collaboration as one of the strongest themes around which technology and a more digital approach to how we work together, how we communicate, how we learn, is going to be absolutely central to this idea of the roadmap. It shouldn't be about revolutionizing, because it is going to be more of an iterative change. Hopefully everybody comes along for the ride. I think revolution tends to imply that there are there are going to be sort of winners and losers, and it's not about that. So I think this is a great topic to be exploring, and I think that there is a huge potential for helping the medical affairs organization in its entirety, as opposed to sort of just particular parts of it. It's not, say, just focusing on that role of the MSL out in the field, or the role of the medical information team back at head office. These teams need to be able to work in an incredibly dynamic and fluid way. And I think, to Mark's point, what we've seen over this year has only emphasised just the agility of these organisations, who I think performed beyond what they thought was possible, given the pressures they've been under. So thank you.
So that's great. Can we pick up, Chris, on something that you just mentioned about the approach to HCP engagement through technological advancements? What are the technological advancements you see that Med Affairs could take advantage of?
I think, you know, to keep going with the theme I started, I think you know, the idea of collaboration is definitely going to be a central theme as we move forward. Saying that, from a medical affairs standpoint, it's important to retain that unique characteristic of what is medical affairs, what value do they deliver, you know, and what differentiates them as compared to their colleagues in other parts of the business. You know, it's not, the old adage of, an MSL is not, a rep with a different business card. You know, they do a very different role. And when you speak to customers, they have a very clear understanding of what that role is. They see the medical affairs team as, as the gateway to, all of the knowledge that, a pharmaceutical organization has, both around its own brands, but also around, the wider disease space. And there is an enormous amount of respect for that. So I think when we start to sort of, touch on sort of what is the role of what can be done to transform HCP engagement, a lot of that is about being able to get better access to, to that institutional knowledge that exists within, within any pharmaceutical organization around their, their expertise. The medicines, the therapeutic areas operate in, the diseases that they focus on. It's not about, the limits of what is in my slide deck. And it's recognizing that, when you talk to people, particularly medical affairs, but even on the commercial side as well, they are highly trained, individuals. They're professionals who know what they're doing, and they desperately want to be able to help their customers, be that from a commercial or a medical standpoint, to better support their patients. So clearly, data is a critical part, but it's not just that data is for the sake of just raw information. It's about being able to provide that as intelligence. So what do we know about that individual? What do we know about the organization, their markets, their patients, and all of those different sets of demands, which should hopefully, if you can bring those together and make those meaningful, instead of just either, dropping, an enormous pile of printouts on somebody's desk and say, the answer's in there somewhere, you can be a lot more, targeted and accurate in terms of addressing their needs or trying to anticipate their needs. So, we think that, it's, when we think about intelligence, it needs to be expansive. So it wants to take advantage of all we know and all that is changing around that set of knowledge, but it also wants to be very inclusive. So it's about that. It's about what, the individuals, the professionals in your own organization, but also, the healthcare professionals that you're working with. I think another, just one, final bit around that is, it's a much, that engagement landscape is often far broader than we probably give it credit to. If you look at how HCPs operate, they are incredibly adept at finding the right answer. And sometimes that right answer is, with your own med affairs team, and sometimes it isn't. And that has to be, except that's not a failure. That's just a choice that the HCP has made to say, I think I can get a better answer to my question by visiting Medscape, or speaking to a colleague, or going on some other forum. So I think there's a very wide a wide view of possibility out there.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. We'll come to you in just a second. I just wanted to encourage the attendees that if you have questions for our panelists, there is a question chat function. Please use it, and we will try to answer all of your questions in the next 45 minutes. So with that, Mark, it looked like you had a reaction to something that Chris was saying.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriella. And I completely agree with Chris. It was one of the points you mentioned about the purpose in medical affairs, and I think, or the role of medical affairs. And, generally medical affairs is reactive, whereas I suppose if we talk about its commercial counterpart, they're much more promotional in that sense. And I think if we understand, or we need to make sure we understand that, because you want to be authentic. And I think it's this sort of, we push a lot around the data and measurement and approved slide decks in the commercial side. But in medical affairs, when you are reactive to a healthcare professional asking those questions, if you come across as using scripted slide decks, and it is scripted, it doesn't really feel authentic. And then you don't really get the success that you want. And I think if you're trying to push the whole digital sense of technology, so you can use technology, but you've got to use technology in the right way. And, you know, I think it's about giving MSLs the ability to have access to lots more information so they can react to talk about the in-depth science of what they need. So I just wanted to add to that point of what Chris said. I think that's really important.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. So Vlad, can we come to you? You had mentioned in your introduction about this sort of dawn of breakthrough on a variety of different therapies and how that's going to demand an evolution of the capabilities for medical affairs. Can you talk a little bit about what capabilities medical affairs needs to develop to meet this kind of new reality with these new therapies?
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle. I think we're all witnessing a sea change right now in R&D in cell and gene therapy. Cell and gene therapy, if you consider that there are about 600 or so companies in various stages of clinical research developing the cell and gene therapy for patients with rare or not so rare diseases. This change has already come us with 4 or 5 products approved, but with probably 300 or so in the next 2 to 3 years that will be coming to patients. And it will be absolutely critical for the medical departments to be ready for that. I think Mark related to that, but the cookie cutter approach of a commercial person giving a 3-bullet pitch around what the cell and gene therapy does is simply behind us. This is individual therapy. So a lot of things need to go right, from patient identification to patient preparation to the logistics from the manufacturing up, say, of an autologous cell therapy to the administrator, to the administration of the care, and then the aftercare in case of gene therapies, monitoring actually for inflammation that happens post-administration, and then actually measuring the outcomes over time, sometimes in months, sometimes ultimately in years, to ensure the welfare of the patient, but also in some cases for reimbursement. So all of this will propel the medical departments frontline and center in ensuring that there is the right trust that Mark highlighted, and Chris told also, I think, about the technology communicating outward, ensuring that the trust exists between the manufacturer and the patient and the physician. So I see for us, a significant opportunity to prepare, engage with the physician to understand that how the therapy should be administered, who should actually not be included potentially in the trials because of eligibility criteria, pre-existing conditions, antibodies, and others, and what to look for in the early days of the administration of these therapies so that the maximum effect of the benefit of the patient can be guaranteed. So all of these kind of major technologies will, in my opinion, require a complete rethink of how the medical department is organized. What are the 2 or 3 questions that need to be ascertained at any step of the administration of these therapies and the follow-up and the monitoring of these cell therapies? And I think it's quite frankly a real exciting time to be in medical services, because all of that will come to the forefront, and medical will actually lead a role. Very few medical departments, I'm afraid, are ready for this. Some of them are putting their first step in place, getting their early steps, and seeing the results of that. But this will be a journey that will, I think, be driven by learning and necessity rather than a prescriptive way of actually running a medical department. And so I'm really excited about this change and what this means for all the colleagues listening in on the line and on this panel.
So we have an interesting question from some of our colleagues on the line asking, Could any of the panelists give some insights how to define concrete KPIs, measuring and highlighting the success of medical affairs departmental success? So thoughts about KPIs for measuring success.
I think KPIs are kind of generally a good practice to have. It requires to know that you have identified what is a critical element of success, what actually can be measured over time, what actually good looks in the eye of the patient, the physician, and the manufacturer, and that you can actually do something about the measurement that you have. So for me, KPIs are a way of working. It's about reducing the variability in the outcome. And I think in any launch, a company would do well in identifying and measuring those particular KPIs. And those could be so important, really also about the patient feedback. Often we focus on the physician, on the pharmacist, channels which we have privileged contact with, but the patient is absolutely critical as well. And I think we're blessed now with many technologies of sensors that we can hook up to kind of direct online immediate data gathering. But we can also find the opportunity to provide the patient with the feedback loop and having distinct elements that we measure, but also giving them free-form contact about what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and capturing that, because it can be incredibly rich to capture that quote-unquote unstructured feedback and actually understanding what's working, what's not working well, and potentially picking up AEs that are so important in the pharmacovigilance, as it's often early days in therapies, and we haven't captured all of the AEs or expression of efficacy early on.
Great. Other thoughts on KPIs from the panelists?
Yeah, Gabrielle, I think it's always been a tough question, I think, for medical affairs, because KPIs tends to be very numbers focused, and medical affairs is generally around the relationship and more long term. But I think it's about listening to the healthcare professionals and also the patients, because I think if medical affairs gets its job right, then there's better understanding, there's better access, and there's better connection to using the medicines that we all look to provide. And I think that leads on to the point that Vlad was talking about. You know, it's becoming less generalized, it's becoming very much personalized. So to keep going towards that, we've got to have those, you know, KPIs very much around measuring performance towards a success. But if we know the purpose and the journey of where we're trying to get to, and then we're listening out to make sure that we're on that path, I think that is the key measure. Because if medical affairs is still doing its job, then commercially the company is doing its job as well.
Great. Emma, we have a question direct to you. This person would like to know how you see the medical affairs role evolve in the context of further digitalization. Will this be a more strategic lead, omni-channel, operational, or execution focused?
So yeah, another great question, and I think you know, speaking to the evolution of the mindset and the way that medical affairs is certainly perceived both internally and externally, I think we have the unique opportunity right now in the sense that we can reach so many different stakeholders that I think we can take more of a strategic leading role and not just simply be the executor. I think you know, how we deliver content and education is really changing. I think, you know, bringing it also back to the previous question on the KPIs, I firmly believe that medical information is really an underused source of kind of value and a KPI, because you know, speaking to what both Vlad and Mark said, it's a voice of understanding of the external perspective, and certainly it's at times the patient. It's a way that we get that information and understand more about our products and how they are perceived, whether that is directly from a patient or whether that is via a pharmacist or a HCP. So for me, I think that is certainly something that needs to be addressed and considered as to the value of medical information. And we really have the opportunity to further define how that looks, whether it's by, you know, working compliantly to develop self-service portals, whether it's by creating bots that are available, whether it's by creating, you know, partnerships and secure sites for patients that are validated via the HCP. Because for me right now is, and we've seen this certainly from our perspective during the initial pandemic and the real closed down, many patients reached out directly to pharmaceutical companies for information because they couldn't contact their healthcare professional. So they reach out to the manufacturer, and we're tied as to what we can do, and we have to direct them back to their healthcare professional. So I think really it's also our social kind of objective and obligation to try and look at how we provide that information more digitally. And you know, I think it's a role of medical to kind of be a partner in that strategically, and again, not just to be the executioner or you know, delivering the message.
Great. So just picking up on that, Emma, when you think about how medical affairs can be more customer and patient-centric in general, what are the skills and capabilities that you think the medical affairs function needs to build?
I think, you know, embracing new technology, embracing a different way of working, listening very much more, listening and being where the conversations are happening. It's really not an easy place to navigate from compliance and regulatory, etc. But, you know, a lot of conversations happen now outside of the scientific congresses, and they're happening on social media, they're happening, you know, and that's where you can understand really either the patient perspective or often, you know, HCPs perspectives on how to manage patients. If you know, look on LinkedIn, look on Twitter, etc., you see these things being discussed. And I think we have to understand how to navigate that area and, you know, work compliantly. I think we have to very much focus on understanding the individual. So the colleagues on the panel have already said, you know, it's about that personalized approach. So we really need to focus on understanding, planning, you know, thinking also about what we're trying to discuss and how we're going about it, and not just going there with the same, you know, as Mark said, kind of orchestrated pitch each time. It has to be very much a peer-to-peer conversation about what's of interest. And yeah, I think really an agility and being ready to embrace new ways of bringing in insights and gathering insights and looking at what is you know, important in the outside world, and not necessarily always being internally focused and coming with our own agenda.
Great. So we have another question from the audience. I've seen in the EY report Beyond COVID-19 that Life Sciences Reimagined, they talked that more than 50%, about 52% of HCPs will prefer a more digital way of communication post-COVID. Do you see that there will be a new role for MSLs similar to sales teams that have had to adapt this year? Why don't we start, Emma, with you, and then we'll go around the room and hear what folks think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so the research, and it's all sort of around the same amount, whichever research you look at. And I think medical is seen as a little bit higher in terms of preference of engagement. And again, I think it speaks to the fact that we can talk about a kind of broader range of topics. But absolutely, I think we have to consider the role that digital brings. I think there will always be a role for face-to-face interactions because, you know, it's human nature. We need that social glue as well, and that's how you continue to build your relationships to further strengthen interactions and engagement. But I think digital is going to continue to play an opportunity because you can simply reach further. You can bring your education and information to a broader number of people and beyond what you may prioritize as kind of top tier. I think we have to consider how we try to prioritize that. So people that are very digitally minded, do we try and engage with them in different ways with infographics rather than a slide deck? Do you try and provide them with different tools? And I think that you know, beyond that, it offers us the opportunity to deliver information immediately. So whereas before your MSL may have had an engagement with a physician and they may have asked for something, and the MSL says, okay, then yes, we'll you know, pass that through to medical information. Well, medical information then could in the future be, you know, here's this website, you can, you know, access this information now because you've asked this request. So I think digital will be certainly a part of the toolbox for the MSLs moving forwards.
Chris, thoughts from you on this question of digital being part of the MSL toolkit?
I mean, one of the perspectives I've sort of been lucky to see over time is the way in which a lot of medical affairs organisations have actually been at the, leading the way in terms of, adopting new capabilities. And I think part of that came down to often they were smaller teams and they were more focused. So when you looked at, the number of MSLs that you might have in, say, an oncology division, you might only have 2 or 3 MSLs covering a whole country. So they're implicitly challenged by, they can't just go out and see their customers in the ways that, reps on the commercial side would be doing. So often, they'd been using, remote engagement tools, collaboration tools already. And the pandemic, of course, accelerated that shift. I think what it does highlight as a challenge, though, is from a resourcing point of view, is often the medical teams are quite small, and there is clear need from both patients and healthcare providers for better access to the knowledge of the medical teams. And that, I think to Vlad's point around the sort of transformation that is potentially there, particularly for organizations in the specialized and personalized medicine space, is they actually have to move from effectively that kind of medical facsimile model of this was my sales organization, here's almost my mirrored structure for my medical teams, to how are we going to work when we have, often, small numbers of clinicians who are specializing in a particular disease space, a small number of patients, but an incredibly deep need for support. And that kind of, when we think about what the patient engagement spaces is showing us, is it's a different landscape to the one which we've traditionally had around healthcare professionals. So I think one of the things we're seeing in terms of that sort of adoption of different technologies, part of it's actually around when we think about how we unify our approach. So it's not just about having Med-Affairs in its own box, which can do all sorts of things, but it's isolated from the rest of the business. That can't happen. You are one organization, you're one company. So from the perspective of your customers and your patients, when they had a need for information, they didn't think who's in Med-Affairs. They contacted Amgen, they contacted GSK, or whoever. And that sort of unified approach can absolutely be supported today. And that's a great thing about where we are now. We have digital platforms. We can operate across the whole business and respect all of the regulatory and compliance considerations around the different engagement rules, how sales is different to medical and so on, but also not just looking at that purely in terms of what we're doing with healthcare professionals, but we're looking at patients in the same breath now. And I think that's going to be that's a huge step forward from where we've been historically.
We have another question from the panel, and maybe I'll start, Mark Johnson, with you. The question is, considering the importance and the need of real-world data, and the importance of improved post-launch surveillance, how does the panel see the role of new technologies collecting this data from patients? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's interesting, quite a few of these questions are looking at data, and it's becoming such an important part, I think, of everything that we're doing in medical affairs, and how we're moving quite quickly. So yes, we've talked about the pandemic accelerating everything we're doing. I think it's a case that we've always been going that way. And talking to the previous question about the data from Ernst & Young, yes, we're going to have to use digital technology. And I think then looking at the sense of purpose, or the direction that Vlad sort of alluded to in terms of the personalized medicine, data becomes even more important. How we are at the moment I'd like to think we're moving in the pandemic into the space of the vaccinations being out there. The absolute need for data and truthful data. So it's not, I'd hate to be able to say the word fake news on a webinar like this, but it feels like it. But it's that getting that real world evidence and that clear data that we need to collect. Also realizing that it's the place we're in. We're in science and it's in research. So that research is constantly moving and constantly improving and changing. And I think we need to make sure that we are being authentic with that data, that the data that we have today may be different tomorrow. So the better access that we have, the better ability to be able to share and have that sort of trust level and that ongoing communication will help us on that journey. And I think we've all, Emma maybe touched on a few points as well. There's what we're allowed to do and permitted to do, and the governance around all of that. So, there's absolute legitimate reasons for a lot of that. But I think from what Chris picked up on, it's one thing seeing this as everything being accelerated. It's another thing seeing this as a great opportunity for us to rethink the model and what we can do and how to engage, what we can share.
Vlad, thoughts on this question about real world data generation and how we can go about it? More things to add?
I think, thank you for the question, Gabriela. Many things have been said, I think, by the panelists, but medical being actually involved in setting the strategy of engaging early on with the R&D teams about what actually the research is pretending to do, how the data will be generated, where are the gaps with what actually our customers, being that physicians or patients, actually need. There is a real role, and I think GSK and both Engine are doing a leadership role in setting the medical teams as leaders in that regard, in setting the strategy of what do we have, what are some of the gaps, how do we prioritize, and how do we prioritize these kind of data needs in terms of trust that will generate between the prescribers and the patients? What will it be in terms of the impact of the uptake, and how will it actually elevate the company in terms of being perceived as being transparent, engaged, and truthful? So there is an enormous strategic role in that, because R&D, as committed as they are in generating the data, their role, once the data is generated, is often then limited, and I think medical has and the necessity to take that over. So that's at the strategic level, Gabriela. At the tactical level, Gabriela, there's also so much new things that are kind of being developed. We, in rare diseases, have, for example, a need to identify new patients because about 60 to 70% of patients with rare diseases don't know that they have the condition. So it is up to the patient, the pharmacist, the physician to find out how they have. And there's so much new tools that are coming available that are so exciting, which is deep artificial intelligence data sets that can go through patient charts, lab results, reimbursement charts, ICD-9, ICD-10 codes, to use that to actually identify patients who have a high likelihood of that diagnosis. And so this online model allows, as Emma said, not just kind of, the replacement of the face-to-face interaction, but allows also a distributive model of engaging with multiple experts on a call with the physician and saying, look, based on our analysis, it may actually be that you have 2 patients with this rare disease in your patient population, and let us now maybe work with you to educate you about the disease, educate your patient about the disease so those patients can be identified. And that is, I think, a real way of new technologies enabled by kind of an online presence to identify patients that could benefit from a new therapy and make a significant impact on the life of patients, which is what we all want in this audience. So I think those are kind of examples at strategic and the tactical level that we're really about to see a huge acceleration of the role of medical.
Any other panelists would like to comment? Okay. So Mark Johnson, we've heard a lot today about trust, collaboration, authenticity. Can you unpack for us how the medical affairs function and maybe even down to the level of the MSLs can build trust with customers in a meaningful way? What skills are required? How do you actually do that? There's this piece around listening to their needs, but what else?
Wow, I mean, it's trying to unpack all of that. You're right, Gabriella, we have all said it, because all of those words, transparency, authenticity, trust, experience, relationships, they're all great, brilliant words, and they're all absolutely right, but it does come down to how we use them and how we implement them. I think there is an inherent trust there because you've got experts talking about core science. And as long as we're clear on that purpose of what they're doing, I think the purpose is very, very important for me. I think Simon Sinek, he's a motivational speaker who I'm a big fan of as well. And there was a podcast recently, and he talked about the purpose changing for him. So not always being a purpose about something, but being about someone. And I think the more we can get closer to that someone in pharma, because it is around the patients. At the end of the day, we're trying to improve the health of the patients with the science. It's been very clear, and I think we've, the evidence and GSK has done a lot of great things with 23andMe and stuff, and looking at all of that data and real world evidence. But it's the transparency, and then if you've got that clear purpose for medical affairs, I think panelists all referred to it, and Emma said, what's the role of medical affairs? And then within that, having clarity around the role of MSLs in this modern workplace, because it is going to change, it is changing, it is getting faster. I think certainly the healthcare professionals that we're communicating with now, they've got a sense of trust in this channel, in digital. I think the technology platforms have improved. I think the way that we're all quite accepting of having lots of issues with technology, it's not like we're constantly saying it doesn't work. We know on the whole, yes, there's always challenges, but on the whole, it works. So I think they've got trust already in the sort of access. I think the communication is also key, but I think it's time. We've always sort of known from research that a lot of the experts, the healthcare professionals, want to have the information at the right time for them. But there's 2 aspects to that time. Now, digital means there's quicker access, but it's also time because we're all under so much pressure. I think certainly in the pandemic, not just the experts in the jobs, but what we've had to support our families and friends, for everybody that's going through different things. So that time thing is an interesting space. So for me, it comes down to, look, lots of the skills that we're already, a lot of our MSLs have. It's a lot of the training, a lot of the communication skills that they have, and using these digital things. But I think we have to stay authentic. If it becomes too scripted, and I know this is always a balance that we're trying to get with approval of what we're doing, but if it becomes too scripted, it takes away the balance of authenticity. And we need to share the data and be transparent. And I absolutely agree with Emma in terms of medical information is a really undervalued resource. But I think it's how we start to, we've been quite scared up until now, well, not scared, but reasons for it, that we haven't made that information and data easily and readily available all over the place, because it does change. But it's how we then have more librarians or more ownership of that data and the access to the data in the right way. I think that will then take us to the next level, and that will constantly just help us build trust with the customers and experts that are out there. So by no means easy feat. I think everyone's always on that journey, and it is always a journey. But I think people are now starting to use the digital channels in a way of connecting. And I agree, you still need those face-to-face, but we're starting to do more things. I think, even for me and my daughters, trying to communicate to them, they will use different digital channels to what, if I say I want to send an email or even a text, they're like, no, put it on a different format. So we're going to have to do that as well. And I think that changes in terms of what the trust is, just being authentic and being open and transparent.
Great, thank you. Chris, thoughts on this question about how to build trust in meaningful ways?
I was just thinking about something that Mark said then, and also just said a little bit earlier when he was talking about, and it could have touched on me from a content standpoint. I think one of the problems that we've seen at the moment is it's always been a pyramid where the sort of point of connection with the healthcare professional was at the top of the pyramid. So you've taken all of that raw data, everything that you knew, and distilled it down to a very core set of knowledge. And then the challenge was, of course, that this wasn't customer centric at all. It certainly wasn't patient centric. It was the sort of what we trust you to say, but sort of way of working, and we can train you on how to say it in the right way. I think authenticity in the digital age lies with recognizing that customers, just to Emma talked about healthcare professionals before, are very good at sort of smelling when something it's not quite right. It feels scripted. It feels like you're reading this from the screen. And the fact that we have people in our organizations who have years of training, deeply understand, not just how to spell the molecule, but have that very deep understanding of the disease space, how it affects people, all those aspects which their peers on the clinical side are facing with their patients. So what they need is, we've always got to basically sort of flip the pyramid. We have the ability to not just use technology to kind of modularize content and shrink it down to its sort of minimum viable form. We need to use the technology to be able to mine the data and bring the right information to the discussion. So it doesn't matter whether it's what form it's in. It doesn't need to be nice looking slides. I think we've got to we are mature enough group of digital consumers now that we can actually cope with content in many different forms, so long as it has meaning. And the meaning that aids that authenticity. So I think that's something which, at the moment, I don't think there's not enough recognition of that. We still sort of tend to look at our communications through the lens of, how do I make this look nice? Is it sort of is it reinforcing our brand brand ethos, or is it actually asking or are we trying to answer a question? And I think that point that the medical organization is kind of inherently reactive. It's very hard to be in the right place, but ahead of time. So when someone comes with a question, generally they want an answer, pretty quick, and they want the right answer, and that needs to be your best possible answer, first time around, not 7 or 8 times later. And I think that's something which we have that huge advantage of. We are blessed with an enormous amount of knowledge. The challenge is, how do we harness it? And part of that is, yes, technology is going to play a key part, but so too, the quality of our people, that they have this ability to, to manage these sort of different, streams of information and bring that answer to their, to their customer. is going to be critical to underlying authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Vlad, when we were introducing yourself, you talked about the importance of trust between stakeholders and how that is so important as part of the function, as part of the medical affairs function. So further thoughts on how you build that trust in a meaningful way across all these different channels?
Trust is so important, but so as Mark said, very hard to define, even though it's kind of one of the key drivers for GSK under the new CEO, as I well know from my time at GSK. But trust, obviously, at the highest level is about authentic in your data, presenting all of the data in a balanced form with very clear communication around where not to use the medicines, contraindications, and AEs. But if you go delve a level below that, it means different things to physician A, nurse B, or pharmacist C. And you have the opportunity actually, and I think Chris attached that to an authentic call, but also having the input of the customer of what does it mean to them? What is most important to them? It may be that the phase 4 safety data is so important, say to an academic researcher, that they really kind of build more trust by hearing that information. Whereas for a nurse practitioner, it's something really practical about what to use, what not to use, or what to expect in the time that the product is administered. So I think with online, you have the ability to query a customer beforehand and to say, what are the most important aspects of trust, what you consider trust at a company? And then to Chris's point, you can actually then tailor your communications in an authentic way around that to say, well, in our phase 4 safety monitoring data, we found that overall the profile that we saw in our phase 3 data was sustained with the exception of A, B, and C, and what does it mean for you? So you have, with the ability of customer preferences in building trust, defining trust at the customer level, the ability to leverage what a medical team at a corporate strategy does in enabling the MSL online to incrementally better build that trust, as opposed to reading off a cookie cutter message that may satisfy 20 or 30% of your audience, but leaves 70% really wanting and actually can frustrate them because you may be rattling off a message that may be balanced in its entirety, but completely misses the mark of impacting patient care.
That's great. Emma, I see you shaking your head yes. Thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think absolutely, and to reinforce, it's the quality of the staff, and so the quality of the MSLs and their ability to have these peer-to-peer conversations, their qualifications. I think it's always a balance because you want to give people opportunities and certainly enable people to develop into an MSL, but then at the same time you need to balance that with having those people that are really accepted and can provide that instant response and a valuable response. I think right now, one of the key things that we can do is just deliver on the transactional elements. So, if somebody asks for something, make sure you do respond with the information when they want it within the time frame. And that's how you will start to build the deeper relationships. But simply demonstrating that you can deliver, then that's the beginning of that and trust relationship. But again, I think there will always be an element face-to-face. I really firmly believe in the opportunities with digital, and it's great, and I'm embracing it with my team. But I think you can't, go beyond just the simple things that can be fixed with a quick conversation face-to-face, and misunderstandings or anything. It can be really avoided, and you can further build that relationship. So I think what we have to do right now is find these little things that can enable us, but I think we have to wait for face-to-face again as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So in this last round, I'm going to ask each of the panelists if you would just tell us what is your call to action to the medical affairs function. What if you could wave your magic wand and have all the medical affairs functions marching in the same direction, what would that direction be? So what's your call to action? Vlad, can we start with you?
Well, I think we all agree in terms of what is key for all of our medical colleagues on this panel, in the audience around the world, and it's really about putting your patient first. Ultimately, it's about the patient need of getting or not getting the right therapy administered, ensuring that the right patients are being found, ensuring that the right balance is being provided. So whatever your medical department does, take, if you will, control of the data gathering, take control of some of the listening of what your physicians and patients actually need and want. Often that has been traditionally housed in market research, that's with commercial. There is a need for actually medical starting to own that understanding so that they can actually devise and understand the strategy that's so important in helping impact the patient through the caregiver. So data is key, develop your strategy, and always put your patients first.
That's great, thank you so much. Chris Wade, call to action for medical affairs.
Well, I think as a software vendor, I think the number one thing that we'd love to see is medical affairs, standing up and being counted as equal partners in the customer and patient discussion. I think for too long and too often, we see an imbalance around, I suppose, the power follows the numbers. So the biggest part of the organization, the sales force, has for a long been, the main decision maker around customer platforms. So we think about CRM systems. Those have historically been focused at the field organization, but reps first, and maybe we'll bring the MSLs in alongside with a few field changes. But it really needs to be looked at as a strategic platform across the whole business. So when you think about your footprint in country, in region, what is your strategy and how you're going to bring that to play? And I think to be able to diminish the role of medical affairs as one of the central functions for value delivery is to make is to dramatically underestimate their value and worth within the organization. So all power to medical affairs, I say.
That's fantastic. Mark, how about you? Call to action.
Yeah, no, I quite like that, Chris. I agree. I think it's about, I think if we keep our North Star as the patient, I think that's absolutely right. And Chris mentioned the word patient centricity, and I think that's right. But if we, I think medical affairs is great, but just the ask would be to continue engaging, continue to listen, and keep challenging, because there's great opportunities. And if we keep doing all of those things and moving forward and standing up, being tall and being proud of what we're doing, everything else will move with us as well. So definitely.
Wonderful. And Emma, closing out our time together, if you had a call to action for medical affairs, what would it be?
I think being clear on that North Star and really, the power of everybody in the last 12 months mobilizing behind the same common objective and common goal with regards to COVID has really demonstrated what we can achieve when we do all pull in the same direction. So I think really, having that always in mind, I think absolutely our social kind of obligation to better serving the patients within the frameworks, and having the discussions as an industry about how we can improve the support for patients as we've identified the challenges during this time, and really being considerate and thinking about how to help with system redesign and support beyond our delivery and provision of products. So really thinking how we can make a difference on a bigger kind of scale in the healthcare system. That would be my wish for Christmas.
Coming.
Wonderful. So Chris, Mark, Vlad, Emma, we want to thank you so much for your insights and your contributions to this conversation this morning. And to our attendees, thank you for being here and for the wonderful, insightful questions. You made us work hard today, which we always appreciate. And I hope that everybody has a good rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining the Next Patient Summit.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.